Listen, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, Sinead, and it's brilliant to have so many experts. I'm a bit intimidated actually by the front table here, so I'll be very careful in what I say about butterflies. I'm also, it was really inspirational actually to hear both Rachel and Jesmond just about your love and inquisitiveness really about moths and butterflies. It's really lovely to hear you talk and the passion that you have. And I'm afraid I'm going to bring you all back down to earth with a bang, because I'm going to actually talk about the data side. I've been told. Okay, sorry, apparently. Yeah, so I'm going to show you some of the hard data that we're generating through the various ways of tracking butterflies in Ireland. I should say at the outset, we're really fortunate in that the data centre, we can actually do a lot in terms of analysing the data. We contribute the data to the European Butterfly Monitoring Scheme, so it can be analysed, but we're totally dependent on the volunteer network, and I know a number of you here in the room actually contribute data and do some monitoring of butterfly monitoring, and it's really hugely important, because without your both time and effort and expertise, it would be impossible to get the picture of what we have. And as I say, the picture isn't particularly bright in terms of the fortunes of butterflies, but I'll go through some of the findings we've had. Okay, so basically in terms of, if we're trying to find out how butterfly populations are changing, there's probably three ways that we can use information that we get from me on butterflies. One is just what we call casual recording. Jesmond mentioned that there was 4 meadow browns in the meadow outside. So just even documenting kind of unsystematic observations of butterflies can be of value, particularly if we have a lot of people doing it. There's the more kind of formalized transect-based monitoring, which is much more systematic methodology, that you repeat your effort to a standard format, and you're able to kind of assess the effort that you put in, so we can come up with some estimate of population change through kind of looking at relative abundance. And what we've introduced since COVID has been this 15-minute butterfly count through the Garden Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. And that's a very straightforward way of just counting what butterflies you see over a 15-minute period. So I'm going to go through, there's 3 sections basically to my presentation. I'm going to go through, first of all, looking at the changes in distribution. Jesmond has already made reference to some of those, looking at the distribution of butterflies, collating the records at a 10-kilometre square basis, seeing how they're changing over time. I'm then going to look at the more detailed population trends we found from the transect-based monitoring, and then finally just look at the changes in populations that seem to be being picked up through the Garden Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. Jesmond mentioned that earlier this year we published an Atlas of Butterflies in Ireland, 2010-2021. We actually tried to compile as much of the observations that people submitted to us, as much of the data as possible that we could get our hands on. And we have a database of over 400,000 observations, both historic and kind of contemporary. We compiled the information according to kind of 10-kilometre squares. Again, as Jesmond has mentioned, there's just over 1,000 10-kilometre squares across the island of Ireland. And we were really fortunate that we were able to cooperate with Butterfly Conservation Ireland, but also with our colleagues in Northern Ireland, Butterfly Conservation Northern Ireland. So we were able to get a picture of, well, first of all, we were able to compile the information that was there, and we were able to get a picture of how butterfly populations were doing across the island of Ireland. So I think the north-south dimension of that was really important. And this is the basic template that we use then for looking at the species profiles. We collated the data, any of the data that we had prior to 2010, mapped it on 10-kilometre squares, and we compared that with any of the more contemporary records that we got from 2010 to 2021. And of course, there was a lot more active recording in the last period. So they're not entirely compatible, or they're not entirely consistent across the two, but we can get some inferences at least about how butterfly populations are doing. And I suppose the important thing to say, when you start looking at collating species observations on a 10-kilometre square basis, and if you see a period that a butterfly, as Jesmond has mentioned, I'll show you to the comma, for example, it has greatly increased its range, or similarly the wall brown that has contracted its range. It means that from one period to the other, that like no butterfly has been either found in a 10-kilometre square or has actually, you have other butterflies colonizing. So changes in range really are showing very significant changes that are happening in butterfly populations. So I'll be showing you some of the data, and some of the data that we have is actually quite alarming. So this is kind of, as I mentioned, the format for the species profiles. That's the Atlas of Butterflies in Ireland, and you're not going to be able to read that. I just realized that it's too small. What we have done, though, is we've collated all the information that we had, but perhaps looking at the data from 2010 to 2021, a more accurate comparison was with the Butterfly Atlas that was produced by Dublin Naturals Field Club. The recording effort was broadly similar, so we compared the number of 10-kilometre squares occupied in the different species from 2010 to 21 and compared that with the Dublin Naturals Field Club data. And again, you probably can't see that, but this is a summary basically of the changing fortunes of Ireland's butterflies that we've seen. The species shown in green are the ones whose range we are confident has expanded since 2010, and the ones in orange or red are the species that have declined. I'm going to just give you a flavour of some of the changes that we've seen in some of these populations. Again, Jesmond has mentioned already that the comma, it's a butterfly. Superficially, it looks a small bit like the small tortoiseshell, but this was first recorded in Wexford in 2000. But I think there was a few historic records for Northern Ireland, actually, that we probably didn't include prior to that. But it colonized the southeast of the island in 2000. And since then, it has spread dramatically, actually, across to the north and west. This is the distribution map showing just up to 2021. But even in the last number of years, the range has extended further. I think it's in, as far as Mayo, I think it's quite extensive. It's interesting that the butterfly was, I live in Kilkenny, in rural Kilkenny, and it's many, many years now I've seen comma in the garden. And actually for maybe 2022 and 2023, it was probably the commonest spring butterfly that I had in the garden. It was more abundant. I saw it more regularly than I saw small tortoiseshells. But I have yet to see a comma this year. I think last year may have been detrimental to it. So it'll be very interesting to see how it fares this year. But perhaps the bad weather that Jesmond referred to last year might have a big impact on it. So that'll be interesting to see. But I've yet to see one this year, which surprises me. Another one of the recent colonists is the Essex skipper. It's a small little butterfly. And again, that was first recorded in 2006 in Mayglass, in Wexford. It's a butterfly that's associated very much with kind of dry, light grasses, so it's probably not going to spread much, I think, beyond, or it'll spread fairly slowly from Wexford. You can see that, again, it's more or less colonized the country in a similar pattern to the comma, but its range expansion is much, much slower than the comma. But it's a delightful little butterfly to see, and it continues to expand. I think it certainly has colonized into Carlow, and I'm not too sure it may have colonized into Kilkenny as well. Holly Blue is one of the species that's actually done well as well. We collated the data prior to 2010, and you can see that it was very much a species that was associated, it has southern distribution in Ireland. But definitely, despite the fact that there's been more recording, apologies, it's trying to get up. Although there's definitely more recording, its spread is quite dramatic. It's quite common right up in Northern Ireland, northwest as well. It's a species that goes in cycles. Populations tend to increase, and then once they get to a certain level, they're parasitized by wasps, and the population drop again. But it's been a number of years now that the population seem to have been increasing year on year. So it's definitely a butterfly that's become much more abundant, and it's also a butterfly that you see commonly in spring in gardens in urban areas. Beautiful one. It's a beautiful butterfly of spring. And another species that's actually fared quite well is the dingy skipper. You can see that it's now been found in a lot more sites in the Midlands, and we think it's got to do, certainly in Kilkenny, it's a lot more widespread than it used to be, and it's very common on forestry tracts. So I suspect it's been brought in, either it's been brought in with the infilling for forestry tracts, or else the conditions there, the limestone, well-drained things, are providing conditions that are favorable for this species. And this spring has been very good. On one of my butterfly transects, I counted 66 dingy skippers. So it's doing really well. And another species that seems to be doing well is the silver wash fritillary, and that's also probably associated with more woodland in Ireland, particularly forest tracks or open woodland rides. They can be quite common where they occur. So in terms of distribution then, the bad news is the wall, as again Jesmond has mentioned, this is a species that was quite, common it probably would, it was widespread across the Midlands of Ireland, and you can see that in recent years it's more or less become absent from the central part of Ireland, and it's now confined to coastal areas. Still along the coast, on occasions you can see it in large numbers, but it certainly it's become much rarer Midlands. And if you just look at Kilkenny, for example, I was noticing, I know Rachel kind of mentioned the value of just recording butterflies without any particular reason. It's good to document, you never know how important it is. But when we were preparing the atlas, I was looking at County Kilkenny, and we moved to Kilkenny, 28 years ago, and I still remember in the gap in the hedge the first year I was there, I saw a wall brown, and I said, oh, that's interesting, and I documented it. It's the second last record that we have in the database for wall in Kilkenny. Kilkenny is now, it's extinct. The wall brown is extinct as within the county. So Jesmond again mentioned, we shouldn't overlook common species. We shouldn't overlook any species. It's always good to get these data. So that's a very dramatic figure, and it's probably one of the species that would be most worried about in terms of its conservation, and probably got to do with too much nitrogen in the air. Another species, and again, Jesmond, you've given the kind of, you've already flagged these, but the gatekeeper is one that at one stage was very much occurred along the southern part, the coastal part of the country, right up as far as Dublin and Meath, but it's now more or less retreated back to southwest Cork. There are still some in Wexford and Waterford, but I suspect that in another couple of years that the population is going to be more or less confined to, coincidentally, where our new Minister for Heritage lives, around West Cork. Okay, then that kind of gives you an overview, I suppose, really of the value that we can derive when we get a large number of observations and compiling them together and look at different time periods. We can get some insights. And I do stress the fact, if you see changes in populations, the range expansions and contractions, something significant is going on with the population level. We're very fortunate in that we've been able to get very reliable data on butterfly populations because of the large network of people who walk transects. Essentially, the monitoring program requires you we call it a transect. It's basically a route that you choose to walk, a fixed route, and you'd walk it. Ideally, the gold standard would be once a week from the 1st of April to the end of September, But we know that that's a ridiculously difficult kind of task to ask people to do. So we've introduced a 5-visit monitoring scheme where that if you can walk it in April and May, and again in July and August, you can get most of the variability. The transect is quite simple. You just fix a route, divide it into different sections, and these sections then essentially are your sampling point, and you walk it on a regular basis, and you count all the butterflies seen within a kind of an imaginary 5-meter cube in front of you. And the data we get is really reliable. I've mentioned, so we've had 113, in 2024, 113 of ye have actually walked transects, and we had 148 transects walked in total. And you can see just one of the figures there to look at is that the total number of butterflies back in 2019 is just under 60,000 individual butterflies recorded. Last year it was just down to 26,000. So just even in terms of the pure volume number of butterflies, last year was quite difficult. So this is the monitoring week, and then if you do, as I mentioned, a 5-visit walk in different time periods, we can also get very reliable data. So what's the butterfly monitoring scheme telling us? Basically, the story is quite bleak. We've been able to produce what we call a multi-species index. So getting all of the data for the 15 commonest species, bring it together, and tracking the trends on these species, you can come up with a multi-species index of how our common butterflies are doing. We only have data derived from this for the 15 commonest species. So population data on things like small blue, wall, for example, we don't have any of those data. Marsh fritillary even is one of the species that we probably could do with more precise data about. So we really are only showing trends on the commoner widespread species. And as Jesmond has mentioned already, when you see kind of significant population declines in species which you think are fairly tolerant of environmental change, or you'd expect it to be, you know that something kind of dramatic is happening in the countryside. So I can't actually read these as you'll have a better facility to do this. So if I remember correctly, 4 of our common species have shown a moderate decline since 2008. And I think 8 have shown a strong decline since 2008. So 2008 was the year that the monitoring scheme was started. It was set up by Eugenia Regan. 2008 is the base year, and how populations are fair relative to that is how we track populations. The moderate decline species are small tortoiseshell, grayling, small copper, and common blue. If you look at the kind of percentage decline, you can see that they're very large numbers, but statistically, they're actually, we're calling them moderate because there's a large amount of error, margin of error. The strong decline species are these. I'm just going to flick through what they look like. The ones that are showing strong decline are meadow brown, ringlet, speckled wood, and small heath. I mean, these are fairly dramatic figures if you look at it. 77% decline in meadow brown in 18 years. Similarly, the decline in some of the whites is equally as dramatic, 74% in large white, and even the green-veined white is 86% decline since 2008. Okay, that's basically the gloomy story to show, but it's very important that we have data, we have the evidence, with the view that we can actually, hopefully, convince people, the people who are making the policies, to actually act on it. And that, of course, is the challenge. I just want to say a small little bit then about, the monitoring scheme is very onerous on people, but we did introduce a 15-minute garden butterfly count to coincide with COVID. And the methodology is quite simple. We ask people, establish your garden and just go out during favorable weather conditions and count the butterflies seen for 15 minutes. So this is the number of counts that we've got since we established it in 2020. It started off with about 800 counts, and last year we had over 1,000. And as you see, the gardens are spread reasonably well across the country, but there's certainly a bias to the southeast. Just analysing the number of individuals counted each week, we actually get a very good picture of butterfly phenology when they're flying, and it matches quite well what we're finding from the more detailed monitoring programs. To show you the difference though, last year, Jesmond has already mentioned last year was a cat year for butterflies. The blue line here is the average number of butterflies that were counted in gardens from 2020 to 2023, and the green line shows you the numbers of butterflies that were counted in 2024. You can see that there's a huge reduction, so there's far fewer butterflies recorded in gardens, and it's interesting to see that a 15-minute count is actually picking that up. And again, last year was a dramatic year for, a dramatically bad year for butterflies, as we've shown. Things like Red Admiral had over 80% fewer butterflies seen in gardens than previous years, and even for the small tortoise shells, there was 78% fewer of them. So basically, those species were decimated last year because of the weather. But interestingly, orange tip numbers were up, and the reason for that is that actually 2023 was a particularly good year for orange tips. So it's difficult in many ways to interpret these data, but what is interesting is that this very simple method of just doing a 15-minute count once a week in your garden, we're beginning to show data that's actually of value. Okay, I'm conscious of my time. Just to show, if we track the flight periods, or sorry, if we track the data, we can show the flight periods for the butterflies from the 15-minute butterfly count. So I suppose the message that I'd say to you, if anyone is at all interested in butterflies, and if you have a garden, if you're interested in spending 15 minutes every week, we would love to have your participation in the Garden Butterfly Monitoring Scheme, and the data is really valuable. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm conscious I think I'm running over. So thank you very much.